Thank you so much for staying. This is an amazing session, and I can't wait to hear from all of them. I'm not going to reintroduce Grant. You've heard his bio before, and he's moderating. So he will be introducing the panelists. This panel is about the impact of global conflict in our local communities. So, like people say, that's happening over there. What does it have to do with me? Why should I care? Even if you don't care about other people, these are some impacts in our own local community. Thank you. And you must speak into the microphone for. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'll do it more.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can't quite see you because I'm using my glasses to read this sheet in front of me. So I'll assume that this blur of people like objects is actually people. As Shreen said, I'm Grant Potts. I'm a professor of philosophy, religion, and humanities here at Austin Community College, and I'll be moderating this panel this afternoon. We have three panelists. They have some initial prepared remarks, and so I'll introduce all three of them, and then we'll have them give their presentations, and then we'll move into a conversation after that. So let me start off with Michael. Dr. Michael Moser is Associate Professor of Instruction at the University of Texas at Austin with a joint appointment in the Department of Government, the Center for European Studies, and the International Relations and Global Studies program. He is the Executive Director of the Global Disinformation Lab, the Assistant Director of the Center for European Studies, as well as a distinguished scholar in the Robert S. Strauss Center for International Security and Law. He teaches courses in European and international security, European environmental policy, comparative and European politics, international organizations, and foreign policy analysis. What fun. From 2018 to 2023, he was the inaugural faculty advisor for the University of Texas at Austin's Peace Corps Prep program, and has also served as a faculty liaison to the U.S. Department of State's Diplomacy Lab program. He serves on various academic advisory bodies on campus, including as a member of the Environmental Justice Faculty Learning Community, an ambassador in the Experiential Learning Initiative, and a member of the Non-Traditional Students Advisory Board. He has won multiple awards for his teaching at UT Austin, most notably being selected as a member of the 2021 Texas 10 by the Texas Exes and the 2016 Raymond Dickson Centennial Endowed Teaching Fellowship. Why don't we give him a quick round of applause? Because he's already done so much, and now he's going to talk to us. Frank, let's go and introduce Frank. Frank has also done quite a bit. Frank Reed is a business educator with 10 plus years of teaching and educational leadership, a technical executive offering more than 20 years of experience in general management, program management, design management, product marketing, and operational leadership. Skilled in increasing profitability, turnarounds, and the acceleration of product development from idea to production. Frank has successfully led turnarounds at startups as small as 3 employees and revenue under 500,000 and divisions as large as 250 employees with revenues over $300 million. He has had international experience, which includes a long-term assignment in the Netherlands. Frank joined Austin Community College first as an adjunct in the management department before being selected as department chair. He now serves as the department as professor. Frank has served on the ACC Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Inaugural Committee, the Academic Master Plan Committee, and the IDEAL Ideal Steering Committee. He has been on advisory panels for interdisciplinary studies and the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. Externally, he has also presented on panels at the Regional Symposium on Race and was a subcommittee member of the Mayor's Task Force for Institutional Racism and Systematic Inequities. Frank has served on the board of directors and advisory boards of several of Austin's important business entities, including Austin Metro YMCA, Agere Community Investment Council, IBM Inclusion Council, and Blom Wireless Incorporated Board of Directors. Frank participated in the 2017 Spring Conflict Symposium on Conflict, Food Insecurity, and Hunger, and has moved to begin working with the Central Texas Food Bank to help reduce hunger in college students. Frank is now a member of the board of directors of that organization. He holds a SCB in electrical engineering and concentration in communication systems from Brown University, as well as an executive MBA with honors from Arizona State University. Hey, we're both ASU grads. He is married to Michelle Reed, and they have one son, Adam, who is an engineer at Amazon. Give Frank your applause. And last but definitely not least, Simone. Simone Talma-Flowers is the executive director of Interfaith Action of Central Texas IACT, whose mission is to cultivate peace and respect through interfaith dialogue, service, and celebration. Simone Talma-Flowers brings over 30 years of extensive experience in nonprofit management. Simone promotes a culture of high performance, support, and collaboration. She advances the mission of the organization by bringing people of diverse faiths, cultures, and backgrounds together to break down the barriers that divide us. Passionate about diversity and inclusion, she believes everyone, regardless of age, gender, religion, and culture should have access to opportunities so they can live up to their fullest potential. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Master of Business Administration from St. Edward's University. Simone is a member of the Austin Area Research Organization, Town Lake Chapter of the Links Incorporated, Impact Austin, and One Voice Central Texas. She currently serves on the board of directors for Community Advancement Network, Austin Housing Repair Coalition, Texas Impact, Swan Songs, Anti-Defamation League, Episcopal Health Foundation, Conspiriere, and as an advisory board member of Urban Roots. Simone served as the mayor's task force on institutional racism and systematic inequities on the mayor's health and fitness council. At her alma mater, she served on the president's task force for systematic racism. Simone is the recipient of the Gulan Peace Award for the Dialogue Institute of Austin, the Outstanding Alumni Award from Leadership Austin, and Ann Durham Robinson Creative Initiative Award from Women Communicators of Austin, and the inaugural 2020 Communitarian Award from the Association of Fundraising Professionals. In 2021, Simone was recognized as a Fab 5 honoree from the Seedling Foundation and received the first T Greater Austin's 9 Core Values Respect Award. Simone received the 2022 Austin Independent School District's Unsung Hero Award. Let's give Simone a round of applause. I just have to say before we get started, it is clear we have a powerful set of minds here at this table with me. I am humbled. Let's hear what they have to say. We'll start with Michael.
Great. Thanks for that introduction. I'm really amazed to be here on this panel. I'm really excited to be here at the symposium. I was talking to Shireen a little while ago. I'm pretty sure I was at the first one of these back when we did it at the East Side campus way back when, and it's really a pleasure to be back. I've missed some in between for lots of different reasons, but it's cool to see you all here. Thanks for coming to the last panel. And sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon is tough, especially if you've been here all day. I didn't get here till 11, and I know that it's been a long day for me, and you all were here since 8. So well done. I thought today you're not going to see a presentation from me. I don't want to drop into lecture mode. I'm really hoping that I can get my part out of the way so I can hear from these two amazing folks and also have a conversation with you. But I thought what I would do is give my perspective as a professor at UT of International Relations and Global Studies. We spend a lot of time talking academically and talking conceptually about the issues that you are all putting into real-world practice here. We don't have peace and conflict studies sort of session. We don't have a peace and conflict studies program in the way that you do. We do sort of in lots of different places, but all credit to Shireen, and you know this already, right? But all credit to Shireen for pulling something together here at ACC that is world-class and kind of in some ways, I'm embarrassed to say, is way better than anything we're doing down the street. Not embarrassed at all, actually. I'm proud of what you guys are doing here. And so I want to give you our perspective in some ways, and kind of my perspective, and how I bring, sort of what I do as an instructor to get some of these concepts across to my students. So I've got students in classes that range from 25 seniors who are working on capstone papers, right, writing 20-page papers on topics of their choosing within sort of reasonable bounds, to classes that are about 85 students on things that you heard in the bio there, from things like European security, broadly speaking, or European environmental politics, or comparative politics. So kind of big, high-level sorts of things, right? But in all the classes, what I try to do, no matter what the size, and it is also true I have an 18-person summer class, because that's the only people you can get to show up in the summer, right? So 18 people on American foreign policy problems and perspectives. But in every one of these classes, I try to relate the global to the local and the global to your everyday life, right? And I had a chance, as I said, I wasn't here to make it all day today, but I had a chance to sit in and listen to this last panel and talk to George Lopez a little bit myself over lunch, and it was really, really clear to me that what I bring is this idea that global conflict is kind of a misnomer. There's no such thing as global conflict. It's all local to somebody, right? And that much of what we're talking about, we heard, sort of the latest round of conflict in the Middle East just this morning. We're following that story pretty closely in my department and others. I've got also personal connections there with various students. And so, my students, their lives, the work that they're doing as students, we try to get across to them that conflict is all things to all people. We're talking about big global issues, geopolitics, but we're also talking about local community politics that in some ways inform the levels above it, right? Community politics, regional, or sort of community, national, regional, global. And all of those going back and forth, up and down in that levels of abstraction. From my perspective as an instructor, this is what I'm trying to get across to the students, is that if you want to understand conflict, and ideally the absence of conflict or conflict mitigation, you have to understand the grievances that are the sort of the legitimate grievances that people bring, the underpinnings to those particular conflicts. It's easy to say, what's happening is wrong, and that is not inaccurate, but it's much more difficult to understand or attempt to understand what it is, why things are happening. And I want to be very clear on this one too. We spend a lot of time talking about understanding. That doesn't mean excusing. It's very possible to have a very strong normative stance and how you believe, sort of what you personally believe about violence and what you personally believe about conflict. And it's possible to set that aside and say, now I need to at least understand why it is that this conflict and why it is that this violence is taking place. And again, not excuse, not justify, but understand. And that's a tricky position sometimes for students to be in. It's a tricky position for an instructor to get across to the students that what we're seeking to do is remove, or at least set aside, some of those kind of normative perspectives. So one of the things that I do in my classes to hopefully help solidify things is I spend 15 minutes of every class, regardless of whether or not it's environmental politics or American foreign policy, what's new in the world, right? And I ask them to bring me news stories, and I want them to bring me news stories that are of passionate interest to them, things they care about. And then we do what I'm just talking about now, this kind of unpacking. Why is it? And I want to know the sort of the how, the what, the when, for sure, but I also want to understand the why, and even more importantly, the so what, right? What does this tell us? What does this particular news story that you may be very, very passionate about, what does it tell us about the global community, broadly speaking, and the way in which that global community is interacting, and the way in which those interactions are percolating all the way down to you? That creates what I like to call informed consumers of the news, which is extraordinarily important in putting my other hat on. Sort of, you heard I run the Global Disinformation Lab at UT. We are really, really bad at creating informed consumers of the news. We're really bad at creating sort of people who can critically think through issues that require multiple facets, multiple perspectives. So I'm trying to get that across to my students, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But generally, when the course evaluations come in at the end of the semester, they tend to say things like, I didn't really follow the news before. I let it just sort of wash over me. I wasn't really sure if I understood what it was that was going on in the world. I knew there were things out there that were happening in places like Iran, or there were things that are happening in places like Malawi, or there are things that are happening in places like Norway or Ukraine. But I'm not entirely sure I had a good sense of how to, sort of make sense of this. And my job is more than teaching any particular subject matter. My job is to get them to think about, again, the sort of making sense of this, making sense of these events. So the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to my colleagues here who have really cool things to say as well is that I see the world, especially when I teach security, I teach what's called a human security perspective. Now, one of the cool things about talking to an audience of folks in peace and conflict studies is I suspect you all know what that means already. I don't have to spend 10 slides going through what human security is. But this idea of flipping international security inside out, turning it not about security of nation states, not about security of international organizations, not about the power structures that underpin global international relations as we know it, but turning the lens to human beings and saying security means, literally, that when people feel they are secure, they are secure. And then, that's ridiculous. That's reductive. You can't say that you're not secure until you feel you're secure. And I say you absolutely can. Not only can you say that, you have to say it. You have to start from that. You have to start and end with that, right? And so human security, this notion of existential threats, not existential threats to nation states, not existential threats to the sort of global order as we know it, but existential threats to you and as an individual is something that I teach in all the classes, whether they're environmental or whether they're traditional security. And the students tend to get a pretty good perspective about, maybe this thing that I read about, this European Union, this weird, big, supranational organization that has 500 million people in 27 countries and doesn't make a lick of sense to me. But maybe it's not about this kind of new world order of taking people's rights away from them and forcing them to do things that Brussels wants. Maybe it's really about empowering people at the local levels to understand that there are kind of institutions that are actually in some ways working for their benefit to make sure that sort of Europe stays, generally speaking, a more peaceful place than others. These are the kind of things I try to get across to the students in my classes. Whether or not it works is open for debate, but that's kind of the way I bring the global perspective in. And some of the work that you are all doing on your local perspective, I love to have it kind of percolate up to my students as well. So thanks. I look forward to the questions from you all.
All right. Good afternoon. Okay, so maybe I stand so that y'all can follow me while I'm talking. So I'm Simone Flowers, and I serve as the Director of Interfaith Action of Central Texas. And our work is really about what are we doing in our community, right? And so my talk is more about you and what you're going to be doing and how you can make a difference, because everything that happens globally, we definitely feel it here locally. So, all right, sure. So, global peace directly impacts our local community and actively participating in daily peace work in our lives is absolutely critical. So at Interfaith Action of Central Texas, we are committed to fostering understanding, compassion, and unity among the diverse communities here in Central Texas. Okay, and why we talk about the importance of global peace. Global peace isn't just a lofty ideal, it's the foundation upon which thriving communities are built. When conflicts rage across borders or tensions simmer between nations, the ripple effects can be felt right here in our own neighborhoods. Whether it's through economic instability, social unrest, or displacement of families seeking refuge, the consequences of global discord are far-reaching. Okay, next. And then, so consider refugees who arrive in Central Texas seeking safety and stability. These individuals have experienced the trauma of conflict firsthand. And it's our responsibility to welcome them with open arms and provide the support they need to rebuild their lives. So with IAC, we have a multitude of programs that we work with people who are fleeing conflict. So one of the big things that we do is, provide support to refugees who are transitioning in their life here in Austin. So we teach English language instruction, mentoring, tutoring, health and wellness, and just provide supportive services so that they can make connections in their community and start a new life here. And then when we talk about peace work, peace work is about fostering peace. I mean, it isn't just about responding to crises, right? It's all about cultivating a culture of compassion and empathy in our daily lives. And each act of kindness, each moment of understanding contributes to the tapestry of peace that binds us together as a community. Whether it's lending a helping hand to a neighbor in need, engaging in respectful dialogue with those who hold different beliefs, or simply practicing gratitude for the diversity that enriches our lives, every gesture matters. Okay, so this is back to you. The piece of empathy, I can't reiterate how important it is for us to build our empathy and compassion. So some of the initiatives that we have at IAC, again, we are proud to be an example through our diverse array of programs and initiatives, from home repair services, which allow elderly residents to age in place with dignity and independence, to our red bench conversations where individuals of all backgrounds come together to share their stories and perspectives. We are committed to creating spaces where mutual respect and understanding can flourish. One of the programs that we do is the passport program, and these are just really tangible ways of bringing us in proximity with each other. And when I say proximity, I mean face-to-face with each other. And part of us being face-to-face with each other, it helps us see the humanity in each other and helps us learn to listen and build compassion. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Red Bench program. But for this one, we go to different congregations and we just go as visitors and guests, and we get to be in a different environment. And so again, this is about stepping out of our comfort zones and immersing ourselves in an unfamiliar environment, right? And it's about us building a deeper appreciation of the richness of our diversity here in our community. Next. One of the other tangible things that we do is every year we do this Interfaith Day of Thanks. It's always the Sunday before Thanksgiving, but it's a way of us bringing people of diverse faiths and cultures together to show how they share gratitude. And it's usually in a service, but people come and they can share a prayer, they can share a poem, song, dance, but it's an interpretation of gratitude. And it's a powerful way of just seeing the diversity of our community and getting and hearing the different languages, seeing the different dress, but it's a way of that connection and familiarity. Next. So the Red Bench Conversations, and we are so proud to partner with ACC for the Red Bench Conversations. This is a Red Bench that we just had last month on working through conflict and working with peace and the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. Dr. Shirin presented here, and the department came up with all our quotes. But this is a real tangible way of building skills on how to listen to each other. One of the most important things that we can do is give our attention to others when they are speaking. And through that attention, we can see the humanity of each other, have a deeper understanding of what they are going through from their own perspective and from their own lived experiences. And so the important thing here is the building skills in listening. And that's just one of the most powerful tools that you can carry anywhere in your life and transfer to personal, career, community gatherings, anything. Listening to others is key. And again, it's another way of building bridges. And then, so your actions make a difference. So the pursuit of global peace begins in our own hearts and radiates outwards, touching every aspect of our lives and communities. Together, we have the power to create a world where compassion triumphs over conflict, where understanding eclipses ignorance, and where the bonds of humanity unite us in our shared journey towards a brighter future. So whatever we do, and however we do it, we need to make sure we see each other and remember that humanity. And again, you know, and a great way is just getting involved in your community. Acts of kindness, just opening the door for someone, you know, just simple ways that we can be open to others. And I know George Lopez talked about the SAT this morning, which is the structural change, attitudinal change, and transactions change. So our work at IAC is really about that attitude. By opening hearts and minds, just having that change where you know that everyone, no matter who they are, where they come from, what is their socioeconomic status, what have you, that they deserve the best that life has to offer, makes a big difference. And when we talk about what's happening globally and locally, again, giving people the opportunity to share what they are going through. We're not asking you to solve the problem, solve the issue, but lending this time makes a big difference by letting people know that you value them. And if there's anything that you hear from me today, is making sure you spend time with people just wherever they're at and listening to them and letting them know that they are valuable to this world and they have a space in it. Okay? Thank you.
Hello? All right. I'm so glad you gave us permission to stand. All right. Shereen came to me and said she'd like me to speak, and I said, why? Well, I have nothing to say about global peace. I know nothing. And she said, yes, you do. And she said, it'll work out. And I said, okay. And then we got together and she said, I want you to talk about your journey in food insecurity and dealing with that. And I like doing that because my journey has very little to do with me, so it's easier to talk about. All right, so let's start at the end. I'm on the board of directors, the finance committee, the strategy committee for the Central Texas Food Bank. And we're talking an organization that last year shipped 60 million meals, 70,000 families. Its geography is very similar to ACC. It's about the size of New Jersey. All right? And when you're thinking globally, it's big. It's big. And peace is big. And the reality is we can't do it by ourselves. Okay? So we got to get together with organizations. Those organizations have to work efficiently. And as a business guy, that makes sense to me. So the first two times I tried to tackle something big, I failed miserably because I did not understand the SAT model that we learned this morning. All right. As an engineer, you put the right people in the right room with the right problem, you go away and you come back and it's solved. All right? As a business person, you put the right people in the right room, you come back and either they figured out how to make money or it's a bad idea. All right? But when you're dealing without the profit motive, you can get the right people in the room and nothing will happen if they're not aligned with attitudes and structures and transactions. So the first time, I thought it was a clear problem. One organization had the resources, the other one had the skill set. This will work out. And because of my career, I have the power, as Shereen was talking about it earlier, I had the power to get important people in the room. Okay, so I was able to call the CEOs of both of them and get them in the room together. And nothing happened. Absolutely nothing happened. Because on the surface, it looked like they were aligned. In reality, they weren't. Okay, their attitudes looked like they were the same. They really weren't. And it just didn't work out. The second time, it was with multiple organizations. And it looked like everything was aligned. The organizations were working well. But it turned out the internal alignment and attitudes within the sponsoring organization weren't the same. The people doing the work weren't in line with the people who were running the organization. And that failed too. So by this time, I'm realizing I'm pretty shitty at this. And I'm walking down the hallway and I see a flyer in 2016. And it's talking about a symposium on integration. And for those of you who remember 2016, one of the big topics back then was DACA and what to do with the law, and we still haven't figured it out. But back then it was in the news all the time. And as a professor who had students in that area, I had no idea. I knew nothing. Okay? So I said, I'm going to go to the symposium. And this talk isn't about that, but it was motivating enough to me that I started working with internal organizations at ACC to learn more and try to get something done and try to support students. All right, so by the time 2017 came along, I was excited for this meeting. And then I get a call from Shereen, and she said, I want you to moderate a panel on food insecurity. I'm like, Shereen, why? I know nothing about. Every time I talk to Serene, she says, I want you to do that. And I always say, why? I don't know anything. I knew nothing about food insecurity, I thought. But it turned out I kind of did. I learned about food deserts, where people might have the resources to buy, but no place to buy it. All right, and that was a term that I realized applied to my own mother, who picked a place to live that was across the street from a grocery store, and the grocery store went out of business. And she didn't drive. All right, so it hit me here. And then I saw a stat that nationally, 30% of students are food insecure. And I just couldn't. I have no words. All right, so I mean, the numbers hit my head, the connection hit my heart, and as people know, in systemic change, you got to hit the head and the heart of the individual if you want any action to happen. And she drove that whole thing drove a bulldozer through both of them. So, and this is where it gets stupid on my part. All right, so again, I have privilege to know people. At that particular time, my best friend was actually the CEO of the Central Texas Food Bank. We talked multiple times a week, but we didn't talk about students and food insecurity. So I get on the phone, I'm like, Derek, we got to feed our students. All right, and he says, and it turned out the reality is he had been telling me this, I just didn't hear it. Okay. So once again, we get the right people in the room, the right problem, they're aligned. Wrong. But this time I stayed in the room and smart people stayed in the room to help get the organizations aligned. And it wasn't that people didn't want to help, it's just they had different problems. At that particular time, for lack of knowledge, ACC was trying to solve the problem of a student is hungry. And you solve that by having a pantry in the campus manager's office where they can get microwavable food so they can eat before they take a test. All right, and that's a real problem and needs to be solved. Food insecurity is, I don't know where the next meal is coming from. And if you give me food, I'm going to give it to my kids, all right, because I got to eat first. Food insecurity cuts through your emotions, cuts through your body, cuts through your well-being, all right? So once we got on, and food insecurity solutions look like what they ended up coming up with is 40 pounds on average delivered to students every other week. All right, there's a heck of a lot of difference between a microwave meal and 40 pounds of healthy food. All right, and so they moved very, very fast, but they hit some blocks. And, you know, again, I was not doing any work. Once again, I never do any work. I was not doing any of the work, but I found out that there was some response time issues on the food bank time, and it had to do with changing of people and so on and so forth. So I talked to Derek, because Derek, when he calls as the CEO and says, what's going on, this is important, it creates momentum. All right? Now, ACC, we love ACC, but the reality is ACC is a bureaucracy, and bureaucracies are designed for stability and consistency, which means that anybody within the organization has the power to say no. All right? And I won't call them out. One of the support organizations at ACC said, we can't do this. And they had concrete reasons. Called to Dr. Rhodes, who was our CEO. And again, he called them and says, you have I will give you the resources to solve this problem, make it happen. Okay. So for those of us science fiction fans, this is like the Ender's Game scenario. You don't want to just solve this problem in front of me. You want to solve this problem and every single problem after that. All right? Because the CEO coming in and saying, this is important, aligns everyone, gets everyone's attitude that we're going to do this. The only question is how. All right? So, first distribution happens in 2017 at Riverside. Things are going well. We're looking at expanding to other areas. My golf outings with Derek are all about organizations and food and so on and so forth. By 2019, he says, you know, Frank, we're about to re-strategize. I want you on the board. And as you can probably guess by now, I said, Derek, why am I going to be on the board? What I got to contribute? And he basically said exactly what you're saying to me when we're golfing. I'm like, okay, I can do that. All right, so COVID hit. And so my first meeting was virtual in April of 2020. We were in full lockdown and people were hungry. All right. And because everyone had everyone else between the two organizations on speed dial, they were aligned in terms of the structure. They had meaningful pilots. They jumped into action. And ACC was one of the major distribution points on multiple campuses. And I asked them for some numbers. So they pulled, and the Hayes campus alone in the first 6 months of 2021, they did 5 distributions that gave food to 14,000 people. We're talking 273,000 pounds of food was distributed at Hayes alone. and we were doing it at Riverside, we were doing it here at Highland. The two organizations, structures that normally require 15 signatures to get things done, were getting done on a handshake and a phone call. Because crises aligns organizations, it makes structures more efficient or it ignores those structures, and it makes the transactions fly very, very quickly. So, once the pandemic portion of COVID went away, there was another barrier, and that was one that I can't remember. Geeti was talking about earlier. People were completely and totally burnt out. All right, the normal ways that we take care of ourselves and we keep our own energy up. Most of us don't have the skill set to keep ourselves mentally healthy in that kind of crisis. Okay, and there was a tremendous amount of turnover, quite frankly, of the people at Food Bank. They all went on to help people in other things, but they needed a change. And so now we've got lots of people who are moving back and forth. But the thing that happened next was beautiful, because one of the things that ACC grew up and one of its growth area is data. All right, so now we knew that, or we know now, I should say, we know that Ashley is our average student. We know that she's 26 years old. We know that she takes care of someone else for at least 10 hours a week. We know that she works between 1 and 2 jobs on average. And we know that 48% of our students are food insecure. Okay? 48%, I mean, we know that we can't teach a hungry person, a person who's not had enough calories to develop the interconnections in the brain to retain the information. It's not just the stomach. Your brain doesn't work if you don't have enough calories. We know this from kindergarten to adults. It just doesn't happen. All right? And so because of those alignment of the structures that were created, the attitudes being completely aligned, and having a history of transaction, we got the Cares Pantry here at Highland, and let me get another number here, which over the last 6 months, it has delivered 84,000 pounds of food. And this is a storefront in Building 1000. We've got distributions in Kyle. We've got distributions at most of our campuses at this point. And the campuses we don't, we're looking at how to do that. Campus-wide, in the last 6 months, college-wide, it's been 161,000 pounds of food have gone to food insecure, mainly students. So, and I could go on about the connections and structures that are continually being developed around nutrition and everything else. But the message here is that we all have some sort of power. We all have some skill set. All right. And as Shireen said at the very beginning of this, and Grant said before, if you can figure out what kind of work you want to do, and you can figure out the strengths that you have, and you can figure out what the world needs, and then, I'm a business guy, so this is kind of important to me. You can figure out who's going to pay you for it. That's the sweet spot, all right? And you don't go after big problems like peace by yourself. You align yourself with an organization that you can align with and use your talents to help them. That's what I got.
All right. Well, we've got a little bit of time to field questions, thoughts. I'm going to open it up to those of you in the audience, if any of you have any questions. And those of you on the panel, if you have any questions or thoughts you want to direct in response to the other presentations, be sure to feel free to let me know that too. We've got a question in the back. And can you say your name when you ask your question?
Oh, my name is Sonia. I'm an advisor at Riverside, the best campus at ACC. And I was just wondering, I was sort of thinking, we're talking about bureaucracies and getting them done, and then the IAC talking about everyday gestures and peace in everyday life. And so obviously, we've talked a lot about like power dynamics, and, everyone has a different station in life. And so when you're in a place like ACC and you're the low man on the totem pole, the very, very bottom, like relatively new, lowest position possible, and you're seeing those issues, and you're in this moment of change that ACC is going through, right? So what are your recommendations for, aligning yourself with people and, not necessarily stepping way beyond your role and creating conflict, but, like making, putting yourself in a position to see the bureaucracy change and see the institution change in ways that fit, what you think it's, should go. Like when you're aligned with what the top person is saying and you're at the bottom, and then you have this big middle, like,
Yeah. Do you guys, are you following?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you heard my story, I failed miserably. What I've learned is from the bottom, you can help accelerate this is not a fact. This is a Frank's view of the world. So I think if it's a large organization, you can help the organization get to where it wants to go. But from the bottom, it's very, very hard to change where it's going. And to do that, once again, you need to build coalitions and other people who are like-minded to get some momentum going. The one example that I've seen that I've never been a part of people making change from the bottom in the bureaucracy was when they ignored it. They got enough people together and skills together to do something and showed the organization what could happen. But when you think about the structures, the attitudes, and the transactions, from the bottom, it's almost impossible to get those aligned. And so often you have to solve the problem you want to solve outside of the organization you work with.
Yes, I would say I work for a very flat organization, and that's why I work for a very flat organization. And so it's so important for you to hold on to your values and let your values direct you. And in our work, for me, I am not the one who's getting a lot of things done. I have to work through many people. And for me, it's always like, who has the listening ears? Who has the relationship with the person per se? Or who will they listen to? And a lot of times is to go talk to that person. And share information. So it's that person utilizing personal relationships and understanding sometimes it's not you. You are not the one to be talking, and being okay with that, but working through others. And I think that has been a big lesson in humility in the work that I'm in.
I'd comment on this. I think there's two things that I think of when you ask that question. I've been a chair, I've been in leadership positions, but I started here as an adjunct faculty member. And when I was an adjunct faculty member, I was still trying to make things change, right? Without necessarily having the status within the organization to leverage. One, I think it depends on the kind of organization you're in. And in an organization like ACC, we do have deliberative structures, our associations, shared governance, and I think leaning into those can be helpful too. Like not just where are the people, but where are the structures of conversation to organize laterally, right? Because you're not going to necessarily organize up unless you do it through opposition, which is an option sometimes, but I think it's one to choose last, not to choose first, because it creates a whole bunch of other problems. But where can you organize laterally to create change? And then secondly, and that can be informal too, like just the people who, like you're talking about, just be stubborn, right? Just insist on it kindly, gently, but persistently and firmly if it's something you believe in. And there's a lot that I've seen happen amongst my colleagues that's helped change the direction of ACC. And a lot of that just comes from that persistence. A lot of it's come from and I think like when I hear your story, Frank, like some of that is just like, oh, I got to know. Okay, well, let me ask again. Right? My kid does that. It annoys me because I'm in power, and I'm sure it annoys the people up top when we do it. But nevertheless, it does help produce change. Those are just my thoughts.
I mean, case in point, we have a Center for Peace and Conflict Studies that came from the bottom up. Having the idea, learning about it, collaborating with other like-minded people, and then asking and asking and asking. All the administrators are gone right now, but they would attest that it's annoying. But, we look at the work that's happened here with all of these people and with you all. I mean, I can't hear about, our topic is like global issues, impact on the community. So we talked about food insecurity. Locally, there are famines going on globally. Would someone care to talk about any of that too?
Well, first, let me say one thing about food insecurity in the United States, and particularly in Central Texas rather. And it's very similar to food insecurity amongst students in that many students come from outside of the community. So not only are they food insecure, but they don't have the connections and the roots to know who can help them. And when you overlay language and culture and refugee status and our Byzantine governmental rules around depending on where you came from, how you came into the country, and what access you have to what help, you end up with a very high food insecurity, even amongst the people who've managed to make it here. And the question I have, which I have no answer, is from a sensible and ethical point, and from a peace point of view, how do we provide arms into a conflict at the same time we're trying to provide food on the other side of the conflict, and how is that all? I'm looking to you for that one. That one's global.
Well, yeah, and I don't have any answers for it, right? But I just this week was an honors proposal or an honors thesis symposium on campus, and was the second reader, and the student was studying food weaponization. This was sort of an honors thesis, and looking specifically at sort of food weaponization as a result or sort of a consequence of Ukraine, but not looking at food and the insecurity that came from that. And for the student's case study, they looked at Egypt. And as a way, and used really a really interesting take on this, was essentially the food web that we learn about as elementary kids, right? And scaling it up to international relations and saying that in many respects, what Russia is doing is acting in some ways as a predator in this kind of relationship. And it's having sort of downstream effects on people who have no party to the conflict, right? So if not just Egypt, this was the case, but all the way across East Africa. And you see, sort of food has been used as a weapon since food has existed, right? I mean, that's a sad but unremarkable fact that food in the sort of the necessity of feeding populations can be turned into the necessity of keeping populations subservient through food, right? I mean, you've heard stories about this in history classes and other sorts of things like that. The challenge that Frank points out on the local level is exacerbated and, in fact, magnified at the international level, because you have organizations like the World Food Program, you've got the United Nations, you've got all of these sort of well-meaning bureaucracies that run into a lot of the same issues that you see here on campus, that you see in Austin, that you see in Central Texas, but magnified with issues of geopolitics and issues of national sort of importance. And then we add the complicating factor of human-caused climate change. You add the complicating factor that while famines sort of have existed since time immemorial, the way in which weather and climate patterns have shifted in some of the world's breadbaskets have exacerbated some of the issues that we're seeing play out. And of course, then we have warfare on top of that, right? So again, I don't have any answers. These are the sort of the questions that we're talking to our students about, saying, yeah, you are food insecure here in Austin. And now put yourself in the shoes of people who are food insecure in Kyiv, and food insecure in Damascus, and food insecure in sort of pick wherever, Mombasa, right? And it goes back to what we were saying before about empathy, right? And it allows students to understand that they're not alone, and that this is something that is a global issue. Sure.
Well, I noticed you didn't mention disinformation, and it seems to me one of the issues that is aggravating food insecurity around the world is demagogic use and cohort party use of flagrant lies to maintain the use of food insecurity as a weapon of war. Any comments on that?
I do have some comments on that, as it turns out. So if you go to a website called GDIL.org, GDIL.org, the Global Disinformation Lab's website at UT, you will see under active projects, a project that they all have really kind of interesting names, easy to remember. We have a project on exactly this, on the use of disinformation in the food security space, and the project's name is Hunger Games, and we had to be very careful not to get sued by Lionsgate Films for that one, right? But you're absolutely right? That the sort of some of the world's most prominent purveyors of disinformation, whether that be in the political space or in the military space or sort of whatever, the information space, broadly speaking, have used tools that they have honed over the years in now the sort of food security space, right? And so food security is bad enough. Food insecurity is bad enough. Weaponization of food is bad enough. And then you surround it by actively sowing disinformation designed to say, this isn't us who's doing this. I don't know what you're talking about. This is something else altogether, right? That is in many ways muddling the information space, making it possible for people to say, well, I'm just asking questions. Isn't this really something that is many, many more layers than what would seem to be intuitively obvious? No, as it turns out, Occam's razor very much applies here, right? The simplest explanation absolutely is the correct one. In this case, Russia absolutely is bombing grain silos on the Black Sea to prevent that grain from being shipped to East Africa. This is not something that we should be debating. And yet, you're absolutely right. The disinformation has become so pervasive in that space that it becomes an issue of contention, when in reality, it's an objective truth. So yeah, I have some thoughts.
So I guess my question isn't so much about your operational approach, but more like your mental approach. So a lot of these uphill battles you guys talk about, I mean, they can't be changed overnight. You know, they take time and they take sacrifice. And so I guess my question is how do you guys find the motivation to sacrifice your professional life and your social life to keep at it? Like, is the answer really just passion, or there's got to be more to it, right?
Well, I think we can all answer that question, right? So one of the questions that we ask in our red bench conversations, the first, it's like 4 rounds of conversation, but the first round is, share your name, what's your faith tradition, or what wakes you up in the morning. And when you think of what your life purpose is, what are your gifts? What gives you energy, and what drives you, and what are your talents, and how you can do good in this world and make this world better. That is that, and earn a living out of it too, right? That's that sweet spot. And it's like how we get there. And a lot of times too is through also some people are really clear about it at the beginning, and then others, is through trial and error, having different experiences. For me, I love people. I love people connecting with each other. I love to see when people meet each other who haven't known each other before, and they may have had, stereotypes or misunderstandings or something, and then you see that spark saying, "Oh my God, this is an amazing person," and for me to see people transformed in front of my eyes is amazing. It gives me so much joy that I'm hyped. It's like a kid in a candy store, and it's like if I can get that candy store experience every day, I'm good. I'm good. And that's what it's not always it manifests itself in that way, but it for me is just being open. How you can see people's hearts opening to each other, and that's what drives me.
I'm going to refer to one of the earlier sessions again about self-care and self-help and self-love. The first thing you have to understand is how you're built, and I hate to say it this way, what can you put up with to get the world where you want it to go? Okay, so for myself, I'm kind of like Simone. What I found out is creating organizations to solve a problem is not for me. I don't have the patience. I burn out. I burnt myself out. But when I'm working when I was on the board at the YMCA and I could go and hang out with the kid, because for me the YMCA was all about the kid, and I could go to the summer camp and I could see the kids learning the skills that they were going to need in life. When I go to people who are getting fed and receiving food, and I see the good, that energizes me. I mean, it's what teaching does for me. I can see the growth in my students. That's what energizes me. There are some, which is the opposite, just for the record, of my business career. My business career was all about design and creating, and once everything was going well, I left. All right, but when it comes to that human thing, I can't not be successful. I can't not be working on something that's not helping people. Or I don't know what the right word is. I'm looking at my wife here. It drives me nuts.
I'd like to say something here. What a great question, Esteban. I always think about how being an optimist can be a choice too. And I think about what my late husband used to say, Don Catterson. He is the first person I went camping with. He took me camping. And he taught me that when you go camping, you're in nature in the woods, you want to leave your campsite, the paths that you've taken on a hike, you want to leave it in better shape than you found it. And I feel that way about, a lot of things in my life. Classes I teach, I hope I make you feel better about yourselves in, all the aspects that relate to you being a student and at ACC. And, when you're working on food security, we're not going to be able to feed every person. But did we find food insecurity a little less bad than we found it? Did we make an impact? And I think that can feed the optimism.
Okay, I'm going to throw this right back at you. What you taught me in 2017 is that food insecurity is actually at least economically driven food insecurity. It is a solvable problem. We've solved it or near solved it twice. All right, once with Nixon's program around welfare and food stamps, pretty much really knocked out, made it much less of an issue. And when we during the pandemic, when we created the program with the child credit money going directly to families, we lowered child food insecurity to levels we'd never seen. All right, we can't ship meals and into food security, but we as a society absolutely positively can. One of the things when I was dipping my toe into, before the seminar, I had some students from Denmark, and the program was designed to expose them to capitalism, but through the eyes of helping people. And we worked with a couple of different nonprofits. And when we got to food insecurity, they just could not understand how our society could let people be hungry. And I honestly, I don't understand either. And I mean, we got food deserts in Waco. We got food deserts in the Eastern Crescent that need different kinds of solutions. In terms of, it's not economics, it's not that people don't have the money, it's they don't have any place to go buy good food. But those are different problems. And if we didn't have to deal with economic food insecurity, we'd have more resources to solve those problems.
I think my name is Natasha. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been a joy to hear from all of you. My question is a little bit of a departure from what we've been talking about. I am very interested in religion and human security, and I'm curious to know from all of your perspectives how that topic relates to peace on a global level and a local level, however you choose to interpret that.
Now, this is a topic that has some real easy answers, right? Each one of us will give you a perspective, I suppose. I work at a university that is by itself one of the largest interfaith communities, sort of in Austin, right? And as you might imagine, recent events over the last multiple months have been challenging for our students and for our administrators, for our faculty, to work through how to have a conversation that is respectful and that recognizes that there are very, very strong and deeply held opinions that go way beyond opinions and go into belief? And then how do you have a conversation about very, very kind of diametrically opposed beliefs and still come to some sort of common understanding, right? And I come back to the word that we've used many, many times today, empathy. Way beyond sympathy, right? Merely understanding what somebody is going through, but empathy for getting to the feelings and getting to the sort of, right, that kind of interpersonal connection that you make. I have never been invited to Oslo to, sort of participate in a peace process. I have not, and as far as I'm aware, will never be awarded any prize for Nobel, from the Nobel Committee for any of this sort of thing. Maybe one of our students, maybe one of you, one of these days will be out there getting a nice medal hung around your necks, all of which will be extraordinary, and we'll applaud you from here. But what I do as an instructor is try to encourage students to have these dialogues among their own peers and among themselves and talk about how their interpersonal interactions can be reflected or can be reflective, maybe, of some of the dialogues that we need to have internationally, right? Again, if I had the answers, I wouldn't be sitting here, right? It would be, but that's sort of my take on things. Or you want to? Yeah, I was going to say we can just go in the order. Well,
Okay. I don't have an answer either. I do have a story that the first time that I was truly aware of peace and conflicts in the world, because I was fairly oblivious to the world for most of my career. Some would argue still. But I was working with two teams, one with Chandler in Arizona, one in Israel. And it was about 2005 and helped me here, 2006. Israel went north into Lebanon and started bombing Beirut. The lead of the team in Arizona was from Lebanon, and his wife and kids were visiting, and they were in Beirut. That brings that conflict, I don't know how many thousands of miles away, right into our lap on a human and personal level. And that, knowing, having visited the folks in Israel several times and having lived in Chandler, Arizona, and worked with the folks at that site, I think it's got to hit you in your heart, and that's got to drive you to do something. I just don't know what that something is. And if enough people get hit in the heart and want to do something, maybe something will change.
So we live in a community. It's a very diverse community here in Austin. And so many times, we live in our silos, and if we're talking religion, we have the Christian community, the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Baha'i community, the Buddhist community, whichever community. And, we stay in our areas, right? And part of it, people stay within their space because they're comfortable, language, we have our understanding. And so many times too, when we have conflicts too, we stay in our community because we are safe. We are safe. It's easier. And situations like right now where, say for example, within the Jewish community, within the Muslim community, we have so much going on right now where we have communities that are so traumatized with what's happening that feel so unsafe, right? And it's like, how do we continue to have these bridges so that we can stay connected. And this is where our work is so important, that continue to have these bridges to participate in ways, even though it's very uncomfortable, even though it's fraught, we have to stay connected. And our work is reminding each other that it's so uncomfortable, even though it's uncomfortable, it's so necessary. Like Rumi, I have to talk about Rumi, because Rumi is like my favorite poet. So Rumi has this poem, and it talks about out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing lies a field. I'll meet you there. Words, even like ideas of each other makes no sense. And part of that is that I feel as though like our work at IAC is that field where we just don't know what's happening, but it's that commitment that we're going to be in that space. And that commitment is to just be in that space, to know that, you know, I'm going to see you, see your humanity, and we're going to work things out. But we know we have each other. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be so hard. But we're gonna stick there, and we're gonna try to work things out. And I think that's that space that for IAC that we really try to create, because it's not all roses. It's conversations, relationships. It's about building relationships, and relationships, in any relationships. Any type of relationship, there's always conflict or so, but it's like how are we committed to stay within and with each other and work through it. Yeah.
So I'm going to give a slightly different perspective here, right? Because we often think about religion through identity. We often think about religion through belief, and those are important aspects of religion. But what we often forget is that these are large, complex, long-standing normative systems, moral systems, right, that create webs of trust, that create communities, right? And that's an important part of it. And because of that, they build large, complex, very powerful institutional structures that are really good at often providing things like basic needs to people, right? One of the works of scholarship that most influenced my thinking about religion is an ethnography I read about a decade ago on the spirituality of single mothers. It was a study done in Boston. She interviewed single mothers and just sort of tried to understand like what's going on with that. And it's a story about poverty. It's a story about the relationship to their churches. And what really stands out is that, you know, poverty is somewhat financial. But poverty is about isolation, right? The single mothers, whatever their poverty level was, you know, their income level was, all below the poverty line, were faring better or worse because they had greater or lesser isolation from a community with resources, most clearly their churches. And so if they were in a church that said, oh, you got pregnant before you were married, that's not the Christian thing to do, and felt alienated from that, that wasn't just a loss of this sort of community of identity, it was a loss of access to a food bank. It was a loss of access to resources to get a job. It was a loss of access to a lot of concrete resources. And I think we often really underestimate how much religions in the United States, but also globally, are systems by which those concrete material resources are distributed through those webs of trust. And that means they can be very powerful at addressing conflict. It also means they can be manipulated and weaponized to create conflict and create harm.
We are out of time. I want to acknowledge that, you know, points that you all made about empathy, staying informed of world events, and understanding, empathizing, feeling it is really hard. it's emotionally hard. And the closer you are to the center of conflict, the closer you are to Iran, Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia, Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, the closer your connections to those regions are, the more you hurt. And it's hard. So take care of yourself as you stay informed. One way I've tried to handle it is, for example, what's going on in Gaza was completely occupying me and was completely paralyzing me for a bit. And then decided, each day I will read a couple of stories to see what's going on. I don't need to see the details of, images, all the horrible stories. So I wanted, back to the morning session, take care of yourself, because if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people either. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. If anybody has other final thoughts you want to share, we have the time for that. Yes? No? You're thinking of something. You should say it.
I just want to thank you for creating these spaces for these truly meaningful conversations. So, as I said, I'm an addict to these symposiums, and I haven't come out of one unchanged. So thank you.
They wouldn't be conversations if you all didn't come. It would just be me going blah, 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 blah by myself. So.
And for me, it's just to reiterate that we're all human beings, and we're not perfect, and just forgiving yourself and just holding space for yourself too. And and just what Dr. Sharon said, rest, take care of yourself. That's one of the biggest tools, apart from also listening, is to care for yourself. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't do the work that you need to do out in this world. And we need you. We need you. So thank you.
Thank you.
When you asked earlier, how do you keep that kind of mental frame? I just want to address that because, when you said that, I was like, well, there's a lot of great hip hop songs about overcoming adversity, and I put those on. But I think that, don't underestimate the power of the poetic word. Don't underestimate that as an ally in this kind of work as well.
And the power of togetherness. You think I do this work for you, I do it for myself. I need it. We all need it. Well, thank you, everyone. This really has been a heartwarming, amazing thing.